All right, well, welcome, Leadership 2.0. This is the third in our series of looking at the world through a cultural lens with Kathy Ellis from the class of 2016. And Kathy, I told you I was reading the book Cast. Well, quoted in that book, and then also in an article about how America has dealt with this virus, was Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman who came and looked in America in 1830. And
Right.
when he did that, and I read that book, and it's amazing because this is almost 200 years later, and that he sees the America we have. And that tells you how ingrained an American ethos is. And I feel that your past two programs, Kathy, have really pointed that out in a way that, I just don't think about it. But that reminded me, seeing his name a couple of times, that it's really out there. So with
Yeah,
that,
thank you for including that. Yeah, and it's not until we leave our national culture, we go to other countries, then we realize what it is to be American. What's a part of those characteristics. So yeah, well done.
yeah, okay, so I'm turning it over to you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. And as people come on in, as Catherine pointed out, it's not necessary to attend part 1, part 2 in order to get part 3. But basically what we're going to be doing is using our cultural lens as a way to see things in a closer way. And sometimes the lens might need not only one, but maybe divided up into 3. So there's crossovers. Not everything fits neatly. And so this is just some other considerations when examining different cultures. So I really appreciate you attending. And how this started was actually through a couple of years ago. I felt like in Sandy Springs, and I've been in the international education field for over 40 years. And I felt like with Sandy Springs, because I see that so many small businesses are, the people are foreign born, they're owned by different nationalities and different backgrounds and things like that. So even within Sandy Springs, we have consulates. I've connected with the Nigerian consulate, and we have UPS, we have some events there, as well as I've done USA orientations with different international newcomers at Newell Brands and other companies as well, even within Mercedes, and also when Porsche was here in Sandy Springs. So we have a lot of international corporations here. So culture is not only through the national, although that's what I work with mostly, is national cultures, but also when we define cultures, it's like a group of people with shared ideas. And so we can say the southeast part of the United States is a culture, Northeast. New York City is a culture. Atlanta is a culture. Even within our companies, we have company cultures. Even if we have the same companies, but maybe the culture here in Atlanta is different than the culture in Chicago, so forth. So be thinking about that as we go through. And also be thinking about the question of your cultural journey, whatever that may be. So we're going to be thinking about that as we go through some of this content. My own cultural journey, in short, was that I was born in a very small town, very isolated, and through a series of events, the doors just opened up. And I'm also a very curious person. And so they just opened up, and I ended up living in about 6 countries. And I include Texas in that as well. So I lived there, and then also learning 2 languages and working with people from all over the world. So a combination of that. So today's agenda is we're going to look at what I call different lens. And the previous times we looked at directness, indirectness, collective, individualistic, and so forth. So now we're going to look at, excuse me, the lens that we're going to be looking at is formality. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, absolutely. I always, very jokingly about Texas, I always say that I lived 4 years in Texas. But we're going to look at formality and informality, which is a big piece when we're looking at different cultures. Fluidity and control, this is about time. How do we look at time? And then status and balance. This is less of a cultural lens, these three components, but it is very much part of when we're looking closer at cultures. So nonverbals, physical space, silence. All of that varies from person to person, of course, but also it's very culturally driven. So remember that a lot of these values, and we'll end up, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of time. We'll end up also with some questions towards the end and some discussion. So in the next slide, Catherine, thank you so much. We're going to be looking at the values and the beliefs because that's what drives the behaviors. And so again, we have the cultural iceberg. And as you know, most of the iceberg is under the water. And those are things that are very indirect, that are a little bit harder to see. And so sometimes we do need a magnifying glass in order to see it closer. And then above the water is things we can see. It could be the person's dress, the skin tone, the music, the food, and so forth. That's a little bit more direct. So in the end, culture is very, very complex. And so we're going to put some structures to it and see if it makes any sense to you. All right, so we'll go to the next slide and we're going to go right into, these are the different lenses that we had, for example. And the ones with stars are ones that we did in the previous Lunch and Learns, and the ones that we're going to do today have the arrows. The one I'm not going to do for today is internal and external control because of the time. So we'll go to the next slide. All right, and here's the lens of formality and informality. And so I'm just going to put on my special glasses here in order to examine the idea of, gosh, what are some components of formality and informality, so forth. So we have a continuum. Not everything fits in a box. So the components of formality would be that there's expected behavior and then there's roles that are very clearly defined. There's a lot of protocol. So I can remember in the previous Lunch and Learn, somebody had traveled to India and they noticed as soon as they got off the plane, the amount of protocol. And that also goes into the hospitality. It goes into collective behaviors, group behaviors. So we also have certain kind of etiquette provides structure, and etiquette of hosting someone in your home, an etiquette of picking somebody up at the airport, etiquette at the table when we eat, and so forth. And it's much more clear, the expectations of formality. As mentioned, defined structures. You're going to use titles. So for example, I have classrooms and I also teach English as a second language. And often when I have Spanish speakers, speakers probably from India or Pakistan, they will address me as teacher, not my name. They'll say profesora or profe for short, but it's always by the title, not by the name. I remember having a colleague and her from East, I think Czech, she was Czech Republic. And she said that no one would address anybody's parents by their first name. It was always a title, Mrs., and then whatever the name was. So that becomes very, very important. Dress also reflects the status. And again, this is going to crawl over into status and balance. So also the brand names, the shoes, the dress, the quality of the material, and so forth. That's also taken in. Something like an antenna is up there, and it's just scanning. All right. And so this is part of these cultural dimensions. And then also you're probably going to have more divisions in the social economic classes, and public and private behaviors are very different. For example, I have a colleague who has taken many, many groups to Russia and the Soviet Union before. And definitely he said there's very marked differences between public and private. So that's also a consideration. And then over into informality, it's an easier interaction. There's less criteria to look at. And so it's just more, the emphasis is on the communication. It's less etiquette, less protocol, looser structures. We use first names in the workplace, even with my boss, with the manager, with so forth. We have a tendency to use our first names. Dressing for comfort. You may see shorts in the city. You will not see shorts in a lot of different countries, especially in the cities. You might see them on the beach. So this is one characteristic. Also coming from a more egalitarian type of cultures. And there's less division of public and private behaviors. Now you notice that there's a continuum there, and I put the American, you can see that when they grade the different countries on a scale, informal, US is very informal. So they're not even in the middle of that continuum, they're towards the end. And so that is something that just to take into account when we have behaviors or cultures on the extreme parts of the continuum, is really to take note of that. And the more we are aware of it, the more we practice, of course, the better it is. When we're interfacing with people that are different than ourselves, the more practice we have, the more repetition, I think, the more comfortable it becomes. So when we look on that informal part, we have more Anglo-Saxon type of cultures, countries. And so Canada, United Kingdom is even, I would put United Kingdom maybe 3/4 or about halfway in there. There's a bit more formality in the United Kingdom, as well as the language is a bit more formal. English in the United States is more casual. All right, so also language has a piece of that. Also, I've been working with Israelis, and they said in this area, it's quite compatible between the US and Israel, this idea of informality, that this is a compatible area, doesn't have as many gaps as other cultural lens. So if we look at the opposite, like formal, definitely Latin America, African countries are going to have more formality, more protocol, and then most of Europe. Now there's bits and pieces of this. It doesn't mean that all of these pieces, all of the criteria here fits in with the formality, and they might just borrow some pieces of the characteristics of that group. Okay, but Europe, remember that you want to think about Southern Europe and Northern Europe. These are very, very different Mediterranean cultures, and then more in the north, which are more Anglo-Saxon. And then also the Middle East and Russia. So I also call, like, United States in a lot of different scenarios. I always say it's the United States, and then 3/4 of the world operates in a very different way. All right, so keep that in mind as we go on, and we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. Time is a big thing. So how does one look at time? Do you live to work, or do you work to live? And again, we have a continuum. So there's control and fluidity. And so you can see that the US is more on the control part. And also in this case, I have a lot of Brazilian clients that I work with, USA orientation. This area here is probably one of the biggest gaps between your Latin American countries, Brazil country, the country of Brazil, and the United States. It's this lack of what they perceived as a lack of flexibility. And so this kind of comes up during this time. So what are the characteristics of more controlled type of cultural lens? One is time is money. It can be measured, saved, and managed. Now, also this is true in the business culture, is that time is money. No matter where we go in the world, we have a business culture. Plans are treated as fixed. Planning is linear. So in the last Lunch and Learn, we talked about linear and nonlinear, and then the different degrees in between. And in the US, it's very linear, A to B, all right? Whereas we might have like what looks like a thunderbolt going from A to B, or it might be kind of a circular motion going from A to B, all right? And the language component built into that. So also, and so I can give you an example of this. It was a Northern European country. I was there visiting. I was visiting a family, and the member of the family, he just couldn't see me because he already wrote in his agenda. His agenda was already planned, and he just couldn't see the way to move that, even though I was there for a limited amount of time. So that is also characteristic. Now, all of this doesn't mean it's bad or good. It just is. All right. So being punctual is super important. In fact, if you want to put in the chat box, how late is late? So let's say in the social, you're having a dinner. Of course, we're under the umbrella of pandemic, but you're having a dinner. How late is late? Go ahead and put something in the chat box. What would be the time that you could move around in there where it's not too late? Good. So I see 15 minutes, 10 minutes. So if we get invited to Scotty's house, we need to make sure 5 minutes, Carolyn says. Okay, very good. Well, this might be a challenge because I lived 7 years in Brazil. And not only do you not go there on time for social, it's not polite to be on time. And so you wait 1 hour. So if dinner's at 7, then you don't show up before 8 o'clock. And then that would be the acceptable time. So very different. And then also the idea of work. So work, we want to be on time. Now, I have my Japanese clients, they're very much on time. So I did put parts of Asia fits this control when it comes to time and meetings. So even they would be the ones that would show up early, and then people come in like 5 minutes to. But in different cultures, it might be okay to come in 5 or 10 minutes later, even for business. And so again, if you're doing any business with any of the cultures that are a little bit more fluid in time, do not take it personally if things do not come in time, because there's another thing that's going on, and that's polychronic. And so what that means is that things are happening and they're in the moment with those things. In other words, the clock doesn't drive what they're doing as much. In the United States, it very much drives the time. It drives what we're doing. So also we focus one thing at a time. This also kind of spills over in making friendships. All right, so making friendships varies from culture to culture as well. And in the US, we have a tendency to have friends and compartmentalized. And what do I mean by that? We might have friends like Leadership Sandy Spring friends. We might have friends playing tennis, but we don't see them for any other event. We might have friends for wine tasting, but not any other events. Whereas in different cultures, it might be you have a friend, for example, in Russia, that friend goes with you for all different kinds of events. All right, so there's also that approach of making friends. So going over in the fluidity side is time is uncontrollable, is subject to other factors. Plans change easily. They change often, and to be flexible. The people are more important than the actual schedule. The relationship plays it's a high component here. And so the relationship is very important. It's approximate and flexible. And there's many things going on at one time. So as you can see on the fluid side, we have Latin American and African cultures, and then South Europe, Mediterranean, and also the Middle East. So again, when I was in Brazil, I would say, what time? Is it going to be Brazilian time? Is it going to be British time? Or is it going to be American time? And so that was a way to kind of minimize the gap and save some embarrassment if I come too early or if I come too late. And when I relocated back to the US, I had a hard time with this one, is the social part of it, to come on time. It was very much a challenge because I adopted and adapted some of the ways. So coming back was also a challenge. It was interesting. All right, so now in the control part, we have, again, more Anglo type of countries. Definitely some components of the Far East. And when I say that, it's usually I'm including China, Japan, and South Korea in that. And also in Russia and Germany, especially. And so in Germany, for example, the train, it takes off at 12:01, not at 12, and it really does take off at 12:01. So time is very much to be respected. Okay, so that's a little bit on time, and then we have the next slide, and that is about, this is what motivates us. Okay, and again, there's different degrees. And when I say status, it also means, okay, status in society or whatever, but it's also part, it's kind of linked with materialism. And if we're looking for the titles and the promotions and things like that, is also part of this picture. And then it goes all the way to balance. So what does that mean? We have status in US is in the not 100%. I might put it at about 80 for the US. And then hard work leads to success. So input equals output, whatever that is. And to be rewarded is very important, to have recognition, to be creative, to have the initiative, and to work long hours, to work hard. Work often spills over, as we know, into our personal lives. So it may be where you're working on a Saturday, or I had a number of some of my international newcomers. They were like going, oh my God, because what they would do, they had children, and so they would leave the office late, but then start work again about maybe 9 or 10 at night, after the kids have gone to bed. And so that was something that was amazing for them in that role. Okay, so spilling over into personal life. Introductions, what we do when we're networking, we have 30-second elevator speeches. We have where what do you do is a way to get to know somebody, even in a social event. Okay, in other cultures, that question wouldn't be asked, like, what do you do? That they would not be business related or any kind of business topic. Discussing business and social situations is acceptable at lunchtime and so forth. We have power breakfasts. We have power lunches. Now, some of this is spilling over into other cultures. We live, and then I have mentioned earlier, like work to live, live to work. All right, kind of different degrees of that phrase. Materialism. So there's a high level of materialistic consumerism in the US. So we have a lot of electronics and easier ways to buy things. And then the balance of life is relationship driven. Initiative is less valued. There's a work-life balance. Introductions often include education, family, or other personal facts. You would never discuss business at social events. Work to live, and also the family. So a lot of times if you say, well, can we get together like Saturday, in order to finish, like, let's say a team project, because this spills over in when you have international teams. So we need to look at this piece very much so, as far as what would be the expectations and getting the work done. What does it look like? So if you say, okay, Saturday, can we get together? No, I'm with my family. This is a sacred time. And so it's just that, kind of keep that in mind if you're working with somebody from different national cultures. So you can also see the country, like on the left, I would put, again, China and Japan and South Korea, very much hard, long hours, hard workers. Perhaps less on the material things and more on the status, on the title is very, very important. And then in the balance, again, we have the fluidity, as you recall from the last slide, the fluidity of time. And so we have Latin American, African countries, most of Europe, and then parts of Asia might go into this. And again, there's variations. So I always look at that. Remember, when you're looking in these cultural lens, something to think about is the climate. And so if you've noticed, the pattern is that you have a warm climate culture and you have colder climate cultures. And then that also plays a role in some of the behaviors that we see. So for example, some African cultures, warm climate. So you have more of a sense of fluidity, a sense of balance, for example. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, I put this in. This is very important. You know, they say that the nonverbals or the body language is like a 65% of the communication. And so these are some of the characteristics included with the nonverbals. And again, nonverbals vary from culture to culture. I put eyes in here because with my quiet cultures, my introverted cultures, Japan or South Korea in that case, until they get to know me and I get to know them, I'm very much looking at trying to pick up on the language from the eyes, from the face, because there's much more silence. We're going to go into silence as well. So there's other things to give me cues. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, we have the body language. So even with that, you know, what are these four men saying? We can tell perhaps, or be relatively on track by looking at the posture of the language. We also have, there's a picture below the eyes, and we can see that there's some kind of a disagreement going on, or the man feels perhaps embarrassed, or he forgot something. And then we also have gestures. So that's also another thing to be very careful, especially with the okay sign and with the thumbs up. The middle finger, believe it or not, is a little bit more universal. So again, with the gestures, we want to make sure this in Brazil is not a good sign at all. And I was told in Australia that you don't do that. Okay, so there's certain kinds of gestures to be very, very careful with. And yeah, just to be aware of that. So if we go through the list, the amount of body movement, I know that I'm an expressive person. And I know when I'm more with your warmer cultures, your warmer climates, I can use more body language, more facial expressions. And when I'm with more kind of the stillness of the face, and then I'll try to minimize it as that. Eye contact, direct and indirect. Staring is a cultural item too. Is it okay to stare at people? In the US, in general, we're taught that staring is not polite. All right, when can you stare? When can you not stare? All right, so that's also a cultural, and I've had some experiences with that. Gestures, be very careful. How do you count numbers? You know, if you have to count on your hands, how do you count numbers? Well, my Asian, they go one. They'll count it like that, starting like this, and I can't get my one finger up, but they'll do it. So number counting is also, head nodding is also another one. Just to be aware, there's different messages, I guess, with that. Also the sounds, and this includes laughter. We also have sounds that we make. Oh yes, to be aware of those sounds. There's a sound in Brazil that they make. It's okay. It's a polite way of saying no. And then there's another sound that some of my Japanese clients might make when they're not sure of something, and they go. So there's different sounds attached to that as well. We also have the proxemics, and that is doing with personal, social, public, and private. It's covered up by the picture. All right, so that's the physical space, and we're going to spend a little bit more time on that. Also, the element of touch. Touch is really important. So how much touching, you know, here in the US, especially with the workplace, we have the sexual harassment going on, and in different workspaces in different countries, how is the touching on the shoulder, linking arms, patting, you know, in Thailand, you don't pat children this way. Here, it's okay to pat children here, but you don't want to do that in certain countries. So that's also very good to know. In the US, we also have the idea of physical space, and it's always arm's length. It's a comfortable space. And also, which is in the next slide that we'll do, but that also is communication, is in the physical space. And appearance is another one, posture and body movement. We also have paralanguage. How loud does one speak? I had a group of Russian speakers, and I thought they were always mad at each other. The body language, the level of the tone, the voice tone. And it really intimidated me in the beginning. And then when I understood, I began to go, oh, okay, that's just a normal way of interacting. And then also with Arabic speakers. So when you have a lot of Arabic, there's, you know, there's this yelling and this, and they're not mad, they're just talking. And it's the way that, so being aware of the speed, the loudness, inflection, and so forth is also important. And then in the end, I had some clients say, I'm just going to keep my hands to myself and just wait for people to tell me where to go and what to do, you know, because there's all these little things to be aware of. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Kev. And that's the physical space. Now I'm going to spend some time on here because it is a big issue here in the US, is the physical space. And so in this, again, is the arm's length. And when you're going to a lot of places, let's say you're getting on a train in Japan and they're just packing the people in the train and so forth, is like there's different space changes according to the context and where you're at. So touching may not be okay, but when it comes to really crowded conditions and then you're shoulder to shoulder, body to body, then that's a, you know, that's a different mechanism there. Okay, so you can see from the pictures here, this is also included in greetings, and greetings are very important because it's the first impression that when you meet somebody, and how close do you get or not get. And so here you can see there's two Arab men, and the way of greeting is, and I call them air kisses. Not on the lip, but just a little bit on the cheek. All right, it's just kind of going in like this. And this is a very common, very close physical contact. And then if you look, you see Hillary Clinton and the leader at one time of the Maori tribe from New Zealand. And the way of greeting, I just thought it was fascinating, going forehead to forehead and then with the nose. And I think another thing to be aware of is, when do you break it off? So I would let that other person let you know, when is it that you stop shaking hands? When is it that you with the greeting, when do you cool it off, I guess is one way of saying. So one reason that the US needs a lot of space, because it is a big country and we are used to space. Our homes are big, our yards, relatively speaking. And so this idea, we can spread out very easily. And we're very sensitive, I think, in general. And maybe some of you have been in certain situations where it was kind of like, wow, it was really testing me. One time I was in line, and this is a Latin American country. And I actually had, I'm really comfortable with physical space. If people get near me, I'm okay with that, as long as I don't perceive it as a threat or anything like that, but I'm comfortable. There was a woman standing behind me, and it was almost like she was resting her chin on my shoulder. And that was my limit right there. And I just said, oh, no, and slowly moving away, you know, to have that more comfortable space. But it's also, what is my limit? And that was it. I just went, okay, now I can feel my limit there. So cultural space can imply respect, emotion, acceptance, and threat. There's also gender, if you have male and female too. Where are you? There's also age considerations. Again, in warm climates, there's more touching. In cold, there's less touching. Workplace. I also had an incident, one of my internationals that was funny. So he does computer training, and he was training 2 American guys. And in order to really get in, they're sharing one screen. In order to get in, he had to sit between the 2 guys. And he's used to very close contact. And so, and he said he noticed that the men were kind of like going like this, a bit uncomfortable. But he couldn't put his finger on it because it's not in his consciousness, the space, because he came from a culture that has very close space. And so he got some feedback after that training from the other 2 men that it was simply too close. So the next time is to provide 3 computers so people are more comfortable in the training and in the space. This is a little bit about greetings, the hands together, the forehead, the bow, the hug, kiss, and shaking hands. Shaking hands, when in doubt, the safest way is to shake hands. Many countries are adopting that tradition of shaking hands. All right, we're going to go to silence. Go on the next. This is a big one because it's fickle. Silence is very, very fickle. And so what is it? So that's also part of the cues. When there's hesitancy or there's silence, it can mean different things, and it just depends. It can mean that they're thinking about the answer, longer pauses. There's a disagreement in that. It could be avoiding conflict or a loss of face, maintaining harmony, not to disagree. For many cultures, it's very uncomfortable to disagree. So I put in the proverb here that very much fits certain cultures, and that is the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, drawing unwanted attention and higher levels of embarrassment. So there's also different degrees of being embarrassed, and those are higher context cultures. And also the idea of loss of face. And so is to be aware of that, principally when you are more with the Asian cultures, is to be aware of that. Language ability may require more time to put thoughts into words. If English is their second language, then it might be that they need more time to put those thoughts. They're not quite sure how to form those thoughts. It could be a sign of respect. I put here used as a weapon. This is in negotiations. So sometimes when you're in international negotiations, you might have a culture that's very talkative, and then a culture that is not very talkative. And so what they do, the silent culture may use that for the silence in order for the talkative culture to fill in the gaps and then give more information. All right, so that's also part of it too. When silence is not golden, I always tell my international newcomers, you always have to speak at meetings. When you're at a meeting and you're there, you either need to ask a question. You don't speak for the sake of speaking, but you need to really put in an idea, ask a question, whatever that case may be, to really encourage that. So that's a big one. Personality, the silence may be with the personality, like if I'm more introverted. The gender, in a lot of cases, a lot of cultures, the female gender is to hold her silence. And then that's culturally based as well. Whenever you're in the situation, it might be good to get on one-on-one or small groups. And also there's more trust building that is needed. So when there's a level of comfort and they get used to you, then there would be a little bit less hesitancy and more outgoing, I think. And there's silence is just unknown. Sometimes we just don't know. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. So let me see, we've got 7 participants, so that means 5, right? If we want, Catherine included, what I thought we could do here is take the question and then take any question you would like. We have the first one: what doubts, comments, or questions do you have on an intercultural communication, the iceberg or the cultural lens? And number 2 is, what do you feel is the next step to further intercultural communication and competency skills for you, Leadership Sandy Springs, at work, or City Springs community, or wherever that you live? How can intercultural communication competency unfold inherent biases, widen diversity, inclusion, and equity? And then number 4, what topics would you like to see in 2021 related to intercultural communication competency? Number 5, what would you like to see in Sandy Springs as far as engaging in differences and building an accepting, diverse international communities? So I'm going to ask each one of you to pick a question. And whenever you're ready, if you don't mind, unmute yourself. I think it might work better if we are, if you unmute versus the chat room, but whatever is comfortable for you.
I think for me, it's, you know, there's a lot of material that you've presented in these 3 sessions. Wish I could remember every bit of it, but you certainly have a good basis for at least thinking when you go into a discussion with multiple cultures. For me, the best way that I have found is to hear from people from that culture directly. They can usually give examples, which it's easier for you to relate to. You know, when you develop friendships, you understand more, you see it in action. And I think it solidifies the learning. I think also then, as you've talked about in every single session, that it matters as you build comfort, as you build knowledge, as you build a familiarity, etc. And that all happens by, you know, being around, looking with, talking with, being in a work situation or a discussion or a social situation. So I think to the extent that leadership can provide opportunities for us to get together in truly diverse groups, and I'm not putting this on Catherine, I mean, it's really difficult. You go to a leadership event and you want to see your friends because you haven't seen them or you haven't talked to them or you haven't, you know, whatever. But, you know, I don't know, maybe pick 3 or 4 cultures that are very prevalent and have a panel of 3 or 4 just talk about their experiences in getting accepted. You know, Carol made the most that she was in another country. We moved around the country, and it was at a time when that book came out. Well, which was it? The 6 or 7 states in the United States or regions or whatever it was back in the early 80s. And that was really true. They were totally different. And my friends from California would, you know, say, well, what's it really like there? I said, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, well put, because even obviously US is such a large country and we have such vast regional differences that one can feel it when they move, you know, from California, Los Angeles to Atlanta, the huge differences, and vice versa. And Andy, well done. I really like, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I don't mean to just limit it to the States, because I think internationally, we've got so many internationals now that it applies.
I liked what you said about, I think, asking the people themselves, you know, learning, because it's a curiosity. It also shows that you're interested in who they are and where they come from. And I think to actually ask people themselves, whatever, if they're coming from a different culture, from either national or international or different regions, and just asking. I think that's one of the best ways. And you also mentioned, you know, the level of comfort and how do we create those friendships? What is it that we can, how to build those bridges? And that's a big one. Well done. Thank you.
So,
back to Carol's comment too, because for what the city could do, I think that the schools do it really well. The schools say, let's have International Day, let's all learn about this stuff. But we have a giant Indian community that I don't think we see. And I know that there's some trouble getting Indians involved. Certainly leadership, certainly, you know, volunteering in the schools, even it's just, that's a culture that seems a little closed off. And I'd love to have some big Indian festival where everybody could come and learn, like the big Greek festival downtown. I think that would be neat.
Yeah, I mean, that is very true. And we also have the consulate in Sandy Springs as well. That, you know, thing that I'm learning very much on the, because India is like saying 27 different countries inside. That one state is very different from the other state, different languages, different religions. That, you know, that in itself is one reason why, because I always thought because somebody's from the same country, they have something in common, but it's not true. Not always.
Well, the other thing
And
about,
India is a special case.
well, when you mentioned consulates, the Nigerian consulate, which is up near us, I had a very good friend that she was not African American, period. You know, she happened to have lived and come from Africa, but she did not relate to what our culture talked about. And somebody else from Jamaica said, don't you ever say that you know, people like me are from blah blah blah. I'm Jamaican. So I think color is we also jump to conclusions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you know, with the color, like I had a class one time and I had a number of West Africans. And then I had a number of African American. There was no mixing. So I think that is an assumption. Yeah, well put. Thank you. I think Chris was getting ready to say something, Chris.
I think she said she was having a problem with her microphone. Maybe we can look in the chat.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Scotty.
Oh, Scotty. Oh, okay. Scotty, did you want to say something?
well, I was just going to kind of piggyback off of what Catherine said about the international celebrations, like what Sandy Springs could do. Yes, schools do a great job of it, but from a city standpoint, I think emphasizing the welcomeness of all cultures within the city through something like that, and of course, it would have to be done, you know, not from, you know, like us planning it, but we'd have to get the input from the cultural folks that we would want to spotlight and show off. We would need them involved in the planning as well to make sure we're representing and doing it the right way. But I think that would be an awesome idea. Once hopefully we can get back to congregating together like that.
Absolutely. And, you know, to go on that again, I'll repeat it. Food is a wonderful thing. So if you have international festivals, you have food, you have music, you have costumes. These are above the iceberg. They're above the water. And that's small, that's comfortable.
Sorry for interrupting, Kathy. I was
Please.
about to say that several people on this call, or Carolyn for sure, know, you know, right here in our own community, I can speak for North Springs and Riverwood to some extent, but there are 30 cultures, different languages spoken. And when North Springs has done international day, night, whatever, it's huge. And they're so, the parents and the kids are, they bring food that they've made. They do wear costumes. They've created boards and all. And, you know, they're so proud to share that. And it's a very warm sense of, you know, of inclusion. And I guess I would just add, I traveled quite a bit now, not so much to South American country, none there, but I don't know about anybody else, but I found that if you just smile and are friendly, and I had fun like in Italy and France trying to say like bonjour or my limited ciao or whatever, in those countries where people were just great. And I found myself at a loss in like Amsterdam because I had no idea how to, what a Dutch equivalent would be. So I would just, you know, smile. And a lot of people obviously speak English, but I just think, you know, I found if you're open and smiling, people are super receptive, and you just feel part of a worldwide group. You know, we're all people coming from different places for sure, but anyway.
Yeah, I think what you said, that the approach is very important, the approach.
Yeah.
But remember, smile doesn't transfer to all cultures, I have to say, because if you're in the East and you're smiling, maybe on the street, you know, it just depends. Yeah, but I know what you're saying. I absolutely know. I think it's the approach, and also in your warmer climates, there's more smiling.
Probably, and it may depend on age and gender too. I think younger people,
there's other
are more open and receptive now, perhaps, than.
Well, like let's say in China, you have to have third party for introductions. So that to approach a stranger is what I guess what I'm saying. You know, you're approaching when we travel, that's the only thing we can do sometimes. Approach a stranger for directions or something like that. So there's also that kind of component in there, just for you to know. Yeah.
Well, I was
like
in China,
what you said,
but I could not have navigated that without a guide who was Chinese, but a young, you know, graduated from college, very fluent in English, and that made all the difference.
Oh yeah.
But they were very open, actually, and you know, were very interested in sharing some personal histories, you know, related to the government. And I found that in some other countries that had a more Soviet influence, people were, you know, if you showed any interest whatsoever, they were more than interested to share with you some, you know, stuff that you would think we would know, but I didn't. So
yeah, it goes a long ways, doesn't it? When we show that we're interested. Absolutely. Are there any others that would like to say something? I saw some things in the chat box. Is there anybody else who would like to add in?
Maybe.
You know, one thing I'm sorry. Sorry, Kelly.
No, go ahead, Scotty.
Oh, well, what I was just going to say is one thing I think is important also is making sure that we do emphasize the cultural differences here in the United States from various areas, because Atlanta is starting to become, well, not started. Atlanta is a melting pot for, you know, people from across the country coming here now because of, you know, various reasons. It's cost of living, tech opportunities, things of that nature. And we can run into a lot of situations where just what they do in California, which is where I'm from, making the adjustment to Atlanta can be quite difficult if there's not an understanding of like just the differences and the nuances out west versus out here in the South. You know, for instance, I'll be honest, I'm still struggling and I've been out here for 20 years now, but I still struggle with the fact that, you know, there's not a lot of cross-cultural friendships that are, you know, out here in the South. Whereas in California, in the Bay Area where I grew up at, I mean, I knew everything about Jewish culture because I went to bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and I knew everything about the Filipino culture because I ate lumpia at festivals, and the Spanish culture because I went to quinceañeras and everything. So, you know, that's still a hard thing for me to I guess come to grips with down here, and I'm hoping that it can change.
Well put. Yes, yes. Yeah, good example, because it was part of your everyday landscape.
Right.
You know, it was every day. It was something that we socialized and we grew up, and that's what we were used to. And then if we go to different parts, yeah, that's a very good example. Even though we have a lot of different nationalities here in Atlanta, it doesn't mean that we have cross-cultural friendships.
Right.
It doesn't mean we are connected.
I think we're getting even less so, unfortunately.
Oh, really? Why do you say that?
Because I think people are going, well, COVID aside.
Yeah.
But you know, I see even in this school situation, I just don't see. I see more division. I see more groups just sort of, for whatever reason. I know Scotty and I have talked before because I'm from California and I had the same experience when I came here. Still do. But I think that leadership's doing some great things. I think that our city may be able to be a leader in that, but you see it has to be, there has to be opportunities. I see even in the programming at the city center, they want to do things that appeal to every culture, but I'd like to see them be more cross culture, where it's not just a Hispanic day, but it's a lot of different cultures coming together.
Yeah.
You know, when I think about it, Georgia State, what is their performing arts center? They're way more, have much more international artists and cultural, I forget what it's called. But you're right, we don't see that here.
Well,
You know, but you know, but I moved here from California 20 some years ago. I was actually born in California. And I don't know, it's been a long time. Just at that time, you know, people were certainly into fitness and more progressive thinking, I would say, than I found here. But over time, I don't know. I get you have a wider exposure, maybe you're right.
It also probably depended upon where you lived, Carol.
Well, I lived in,
If you
in the Los Angeles area.
It's how we grew up.
Well,
right? The socialization and how one grows up.
Well, okay, but I moved from Michigan, previously having lived in the Cleveland area, and you find a lot of, and I work for the Stouffer Corporation, they're restaurants, and they started out because they employed many women, for the most part, from ethnic countries, a lot of them like Slavic countries, Poles, Italians that, I mean, they're neighborhoods that you don't find. I can tell you, like my last name, there aren't many, Polish last names in this part of the country.
Right.
And, I don't know. I'm just.
Yeah.
And
I think this is all very good.
People don't even know what's outside there. If you can live and go to school and work and be pretty oblivious to people who may appear different from you, because you just really don't interact with them.
Yeah.
Here in Sandy Springs.
I think I just saw the time, and I have a few more slides. It won't take very long. And then I'm just aware of everybody's time. And thank you everyone for inputting. I think also this conversation, we can continue it
Right.
in different ways. I think, it's just the begin. It's really hard to stop something now that it's really, how's the word, stimulating, and to really go into this. I think it would be well worth the time and effort. So just to wrap it up is Catherine's going to go through the enter buttons, but I want to leave you with this. And they're simple thoughts, but they're profound. Thank you, Chris. Recognize your own cultural values and biases, your inherent biases. We all have them. And it's to really sit with it and recognize it. And then appreciate others that have different values. And I want to go beyond that for the next one, is to embrace it, is to, like a magnet, be attracted to it, understand why. Understanding is a huge piece. We don't necessarily have to accept it, but to embrace it is very important. Thank you, Scotty. Learn the cultural model, these different cultural lenses, as a way of kind of looking at things in a closer way, perhaps, or there's other components as well. And then the next one, you can learn different cultures. There was somebody that said, ask questions about their culture. All questions are good because your intention is good. Develop strategies to adjust to cultural signals. We may have to do some modifications according to the signals that we receive. Be open to continuous learning. It's not leaning, learning, and capitalize on culture and diversity. So I want to leave you with this, and then the next slide, and then the next one. To go back, wishing everybody a wonderful holiday during this time. And also, if we have a few minutes, is to go, what is part of your cultural journey? If anybody would like to stay a couple of minutes. And we heard some earlier where born in Michigan, went to Ohio, California, things that have influenced us and where we lived. And what is part of your cultural journey, if anybody would like to. Catherine, can we go a little bit over time?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If anybody would like to say, okay, what is your cultural journey?
Well, I definitely had an odd upbringing with a Navy background. So my dad and my mom were in the Navy. I was born overseas. We lived in the Philippines. We traveled. We moved a lot. So we lived in California too. It's funny how different California feels.
That came up, several times. Yeah.
But I think it's been good. I think travel helps. I think if you stay in the same place and you expect to appreciate diversity, it's much harder than if you go, or like you live in other countries. It's
thank you, Scotty.
It's good stuff. It's I think that's what I see when I find people aren't embracing other cultures. They just haven't gone anywhere.
Right. I think too, Catherine, it has something to do, like, let's say personality characteristics, the travel piece, the curiosity, because I know people that have traveled, but there aren't that many changes, or the military. You would think we have a lot of military bases just because one is in Japan or South Korea. How much of the culture do they take in too, So I think part of that might be there. Is there anybody else that's here? I see 4. There, yeah, okay. So we have
3
Carol.
of us.
Yeah, thank you
Did
for
Carolyn
coming.
go
Yeah.
up?
Yeah, but she was kicked off during the thing, so she might have been.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Kathy, I just have to share with you. I said it to Catherine, and she knows me pretty well. I definitely, when I look at all the traditional, where most Americans fall, I would definitely see myself not completely in that realm. Like, I have not lived in South America, but I would tend to be way more flexible about time and
right.
and all that stuff. And I am way more contextual when I speak. That's relationships, like, really, like, that is what matters to me. It's I'm not somebody who's working to live. On the other hand, I care about the quality of my own output, you know what I mean? So like I'm sort of, anyway, it's just an interesting,
Well, yeah,
I found what you said very interesting and relevant to me in terms of understanding, you know, myself and how other people really, some people don't appreciate, you know, appreciate getting to the point more and, you know, a more cut and dried approach. And that's probably not me.
Oh,
So,
well, I wish I would have stressed a little bit more. I mean, I did mention that just because you're part of a group doesn't mean that we carry these characteristics, like you mentioned, okay, American characteristics, but it doesn't mean that you are in there. Like we have different deviations. I'm certainly one of them too. I feel, and I know Catherine too, you know, it's like, there's times I feel very American. And then there's times where I feel very Brazilian. Like there's different things that hit me in different ways. And I think that's because through travel, through who we are, and going underneath the water of the iceberg, in that what is natural for us, what is not natural, you know, what's comfortable. Because it is about a level of comfort, you know, to get in environments. Like I think part of the learning is to get into environments. We have to be put in environments that are a little uncomfortable in order for us to learn. Does that make sense?
yeah, you know, Catherine, you moved obviously a lot all over the place. Did you find was making friends like a priority for you or your family, or was that within the base pretty much? I'm just curious about that.
It was easy to relate to the people who also had to move around. So for sure, they were the easier friendships. But I know I find it was a chore, you know, to have to keep going. And then you always knew you were leaving.
Yeah. So to invest.
But I think what it did was set me up for now, which is living in one place for a long time and really investing in my community. I think that is the result of having moved so much.
Have you ever heard, Catherine, have you ever heard of TCKs?
No.
Look that up. Okay. It's third culture kids.
Oh, yeah.
And these are kids that have been basically raised in various cultures all over the world. And I think it's interesting. And so that's its own culture in itself, because what you said is very important, that you knew that you were going to be with other kids who have the same background as you did, like moving around.
Yes.
And that's a strong component. That's a very strong bridge.
Yes.
To have when you're connecting, you know, when you're going to different schools, different countries.
I guess I mentioned that because my parents have always lived far from their families. I mean, not within the States, okay? And when I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and my grandparents lived in Wyoming and Minnesota, at the time when we would go on family vacations, we were like world travelers back in the, you know, I'm older than Catherine, but to take a car trip for 2 weeks and go to, you know, Wyoming and Minnesota, where in the little town of Dover, Ohio, there were kids who had never been outside of Tuscarawas County at that time. So that was like huge. And it's funny because, and then we moved to the Cleveland area, and Cleveland, and it may be changing now, but there was the west side of Cleveland and the east side of Cleveland. And a lot of people, that's geographic, there's lots of housing, it's, you know, demographics anyway, money, but a lot of people had family in that area. And so people could be friendly, but really when it came down to holidays, and they're going to get together with all their extended family that lived right there in Cleveland. Now that might have changed since we didn't have that. I grew up in a home where my mother and father were very gracious, very welcoming, and made an effort to, you know, create friends and family where we didn't have any. And so I have found myself in that same, I don't have any family in this area. Well, now I have adult children, but that's, you know, I've lived here a long time without anybody close by. And I sense that, so I make an effort, you know, to reach out. It was funny when my kids, we moved here, and I went to this first preschool parent open house, and I thought moving here, just as an aside, from California would be like a point of conversation. And I can't tell you how many, I moved, 1 million people had moved here from California. And then finding actual people who had grown up here and were actual, you know, long-term residents of the South. People brought their own allegiances to their sports teams, their colleges. You know, you might live in Atlanta, but if you grew up in Chicago, you might, want to see the Bears win, or, you know what I mean? It's just an interesting thing. But I think definitely I see among my children, more exposure. That's where social media, being able to easily connect with people, I think is great. And one of the benefits of COVID is, for me, actually reconnecting with some college sorority sisters almost 50 years ago. We have not been in touch, and now we're doing these monthly Zooms. And to reconnect with somebody that knew you when you were like 18 or 19 and see, where we've all come from and who we are now as people, it's something kind of cool about that. So
yeah.
But communication is the whole thing. I don't, however you communicate.
Right.
Anyway, I'm big on it, obviously. So
the cultural piece is highly driven through the workplace. That's really what drives it. Is if you have volunteer, like nonprofit organizations or volunteer organizations or the workplace, that's really what drives this cultural dimensions. Very much so, because it was back in the 50s and 60s, and they had questions like IBM was coming out, Ford company all over the world. And they said, we know people are different, but how are they different? And then there, believe it or not, it came out of the Netherlands that had they did a lot of in-depth studies, and that's where the dimensions, these cultural lens and the degrees numerically on the continuum, that they said, okay, yeah, we're different. This is how we're different.
Well, you did AFS, right? Is that how you got involved? Was it AFS? What is that? I forget what that acronym stands for.
The French, is that the French? AFS,
no,
it sounds familiar.
Well, when I was in high school, that's
Youth
kids
for understanding, like
it's like that, but it was where kids came, went to your high school from, and they lived with the
exchange students.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That, I forget what that was a big thing in where I lived.
Yes.
I don't see that as much. Actually, we did have kids coming from to us from other countries in North Springs, but it was kind of a different setup and trying to find homes and families for them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's still going on. Yeah.
It is, but it's not. I don't know if it's the big thing that it used to be. I'm not sure.
Maybe not, because, that's how I got involved. I went to the Netherlands, exchange student in high school. Right. I never been on a plane.
Right.
I never been inside of an apartment.
Right.
And I went to Amsterdam, and that's a major piece. I mean, there are different influences, but that piece, the exposure to that, it was very difficult. But I said, I'm going back, and I went back 2 years later.
Right.
The learning. So it took me down a completely different path.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar? I don't know if it still exists with something here in Atlanta, or I guess it's international, called the Friendship Force.
Yes. It's Russian based. Jimmy Carter. It's part of Georgia Council for International Visitors. It's associated with that.
See, that would be interesting. The reason we say that is we moved here in 93. The Olympics came in 96. And the church that we were affiliated with, some people there were very involved with the Friendship Force, which, Catherine, that's where people host people in their homes, anyway, so we ended up hosting the parents of the Swedish pentathlete who competed in the Olympics. And it was wonderful. Anyway,
Yeah.
But
So-
that there's a lot, when I think I hadn't thought about all that, there's lots of things we could tap into, you know, in terms of, I don't know, rich experiences here in the city, but you know, I don't know how we pull all that together, or even within leadership, Catherine, if we did some more.
Well, there's,
Trouble.
you know, a part of that, because we know that Atlanta is a gold mine. It's
Right.
absolutely, there's so many different organizations and groups that we can connect. I think it's a matter of desire, to have the desire to do that, and the time and the energy.
Right.
And so when you go into that, like I have a group, Intercultural Atlanta, it's about 250 people. These are all professionals related to the cultural training. Georgia International, there's a lot of organizations that are civic, community, government connected. There's the sister cities
Right.
of Atlanta. I did the Rio de Janeiro as a sister city of Atlanta. I was on that for a while. Sister states. Georgia was with another state in another country. So all of that, you know, could be like, you know, it could be gathering these organizations just to let people know about them if they wish to host people in their house.
I just wonder if there'd be an affinity group, you know, within leadership, people just who are interested in other cultures, international or travel. I don't know.
Yeah, somehow we haven't tapped into the consulates. Why are we not going to the Nigerian consulate? I can't think of anything that would be more cool.
Well, you did do the
It
Indian
was so
one,
cool.
The Indian one, but
The
yeah.
guy, and I knew, you know, it was an interesting story, just a very, very short. So I knew with the consulate, in order to connect with him, and he was very receptive, you know, again, we're talking, you know, hospitality, it was a lot of protocol, all of that. And I said, now who's going to win the World Cup this year? Oh my God, he got so animated. And I said, I knew the question to ask.
Yeah.
And then that just opened it up. He was a different person. And he said, oh, you know, blah, you know, all of that. And so that to me was like, that's knowing underneath the water a little bit, you know, who's going to win, you know, being aware like how big
Right.
soccer is.
It's huge.
Huge.
I was in Amsterdam when Amsterdam was competing for the final cup against
Oh,
Argentina. I think actually, did they win? Anyway,
wasn't it Germany? No, yeah, Germany.
Well, we
Oh
lost.
my God.
I never paid that much attention to soccer. Let me tell you, well, you know, like every place we went, we would be watching soccer at night, and it was really interesting.
It
France,
was.
England, Italy, you name it. People in little, you know, lights on and watching all at one little screen, and
Yes.
it was
Or
fun.
big outdoor screens. We
Yeah,
saw
exactly.
Poland,
Really
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, the Dutch and wearing orange.
Yes.
And my Dutchies.
Well,
yeah.
You know what? We thought they were going to win, and the whole
Oh,
Amsterdam was quiet as a mouse. You know, everybody was watching, and it was really kind of sad when,
oh.
you know, there were no fireworks or anything. So,
It's like, it's a funeral, it's mourning, you know. Yeah. So even connecting with the consulates, kind of going back with that,
yeah.
I found that wasn't a really good way. It's only good if you have trade or on a business nature, and they're there for citizens of their country. I think in the community, unless they have an arm it's a big enough consulate where they can go into like Mexican consulate's huge. So they have a very strong arm that goes into the community.
Right.
I always thought it would be very helpful, but it really wasn't, because the leadership turns over like every 3 years.
We found
and
that.
you have to have a new
point,
friendship.
Yeah.
You know,
And so Indian consulate is a little bit more active these days. Nigerian, they might be interested, might do some social aspects maybe with leadership.
when leadership hosted Movies by Moonlight a few years ago, what was my first, and we did the Coco, the Disney, the Day of the Dead. And we had the man, I forget who from the Consul General from Mexico. He and his wife came and they brought their daughter. We got involved in this huge conversation. We were like, suddenly we were all each other's best friends. We were going to go on a Betty Klein, Catherine, to somebody, you know, they were talking about where to go in Mexico that's not, you know,
That's
the
safe
typical,
enough.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
safe.
things that they really, and I don't know, it was great. It would be a really rich kind of, you're right. I mean, we'd have to decide if that was a focus that we wanted to pursue or something.
Also, the
There's lots of
consul,
resources.
the consul general now of Mexican consulate, he's so approachable.
Yes, is that the same
He
name? Do
is
you know his
so
name?
approachable, and they have art vernissage, art openings at the consulate that I like to attend. When you're there at the art opening, and they usually do, believe it or not, they do it with DACA artists.
Yeah.
And it's just lovely. And they have then there's a restaurant that comes in and you can have a full dinner. That's hospitality. I mean, they really, it's just a lovely, so maybe it, you know, is to kind of marinate and think about what would be realistic to do, what would be possible to do, like leadership, connecting, what would the outcome or the purpose be? What is it that we would like to see? And related, maybe that could be an arm of social justice. I don't know.
Well, let's just have a final thank you, Kathy. Very much appreciate what you've imparted to us in these 3 sessions. It's been excellent.